Hey guys, two topics presented themselves to us today that at first might seem to be totally unrelated to each other, and they sort of are, but you'll also recognise that there are a lot of points in common that will explain each of them. So I'll tell you the first one first. The first one is that the schools have just had 2 weeks of winter vacation, as we do this time every year, and that was due to end on Friday, right? So what they do is they've had 2 weeks of holidays, and then on the Friday they go back to school in the morning. This is most schools, not all schools, but most elementary and junior high school and high schools. So they've had 2 weeks of holiday, and then on the Friday morning the kids get up and go to school until about 11:30, and then they go home again. And then Monday's a public holiday, so they go home again, and then they have a long weekend. They have a 3-day weekend. So just to cover that again, for those of you who are sitting there going, what? So they had 2 weeks of holidays, and then on the Friday of the second week, they have to go to school in the morning for about 3 hours. They'll probably just hand in their homework and do some other random stuff, and then they'll go home, and then it's a long weekend, so they'll have 3 days at home, or 3 days off. And then on the Tuesday, they'll go back to school again for a normal day. So, you can imagine in a lot of countries, in a lot of other countries, if you suggested that to parents and students, everybody, and probably teachers, students, parents and teachers would all say, that's pretty ridiculous. Why would we do that? Doesn't it make sense just to continue the holiday through till the end of the public holiday on the Monday and then come to school on Tuesday, which would mean that everybody would have an extra 3 days in a row, so it'd be like 17-day holiday or something instead of a 14-day holiday. Because as you can imagine, for parents, those of you watching, we talked before about on our How to Do Stuff in Japan playlist about raising kids in Japan. You know, you imagine for parents who have to work or have other things to do, to try and, you know, the logistics of that. So everybody has to get ready, all the parents have to get the kids ready for school, and then send them off for 3 hours, and then they come back, and then it's 3 days off again. So that's we've talked about that sort of thing before. There's a lot of really illogical stuff like that with the school timetables, and they all do it. It's not just one weird school that does it. They all do it, you know? And you can imagine if you tried that in a lot of countries and said, okay, everybody, all parents and teachers and students, this is what we're going to do. You'll have 2 weeks off. You'll go to school for 3 hours, and then you'll have another 3 days off. I think most parents and teachers and students would say that's pretty ridiculous. Why would we do that? And then, because everybody would be saying how ridiculous it was, they go, yeah, you're right, we won't do that, that's silly, right? But in Japan, they do it every year. Every year in the winter holidays, and summer holidays is the same. They'll say, okay, first day back at school's the Friday, you know, come to school for a couple of hours on the Friday, and then it's the weekend, and then you go back to school again on the Monday. So it's just weird. So that's just a bit of a heads up. If you're going to be in Japan, you're going to have kids, you know, your kids are going to be going to school in Japan. Get used to that. You know, we've talked about this before. We have on our refrigerator, always on our refrigerator, we have the schedule showing the hours that the kids are going to school, because it varies. It varies. It varies from day to day. You know, Monday they finish at 2:30, and the other days they finish at 3:50, and you know, it varies. And then some days, just because there's some other activities on or something, it'll change. So you've got to check it all the time. And you see parents all the time that have messed it up. But you'll see parents walking out of the school grounds, you know, because they've gone early because they didn't look at the refrigerator at the schedule, you know. And again, some people from some countries would say, why don't they just have the same finishing time every day? Because it's really hard. Parents who work, you know, when the schedule's constantly changing like that, you know, it messes them up, because they, you know, if they want to be available for their kids when they finish school, it's hard for them to have any sort of work schedule, you know. So it's just illogical and irrational, but it's just the way it is. So if you've got kids and you're going to be living in Japan, your kids are going to go to school, you just got to accept it. There's no point in complaining about it or talking about it, because it's just the way it is. So That's just the way it is. The other topic that arose today, that you'll see the connection, is they did another one of those comparisons, productivity comparisons between countries. And out of 68 countries, Japan was like number 63, right? And out of the G7 countries, it was number 7 again, right? The lowest productivity of all the G7 countries, and out of 68 countries that they compared, the 63rd. Now, this isn't going to surprise those of you who live in Japan. Aren't going to be surprised because you know how it works here. Those of you who've watched our videos for a while would recognise what we've talked about before, the faffing. And on the myths playlist, we did a video a while ago about, you know, that myth about how hard Japanese people work. And, you know, some people we know, some Japanese people we know work pretty hard, but usually it's an illusion. Usually it's an illusion, and most of it's just wasting time, you know. And everything we've said about that is proven in this study that happens regularly. We've reported on this before. I'm not sure how often they do that study, but every time it comes out, you know, the latest productivity study shows that Japan is number 7 in the G7 countries again, last in the G7 countries again, and always down the bottom out of the other 68 countries, or however many they check. It's always down the bottom, towards the bottom of the list, you know, lowest productivity. And it's exactly what we've always talked about. It's not surprising. They always act surprised whenever it comes out. They go, oh, no good, right? Which is ridiculous because they work so they work long hours, lots of people, but they're not working smarter. So they do the opposite. You know, in some countries we say work smarter, not harder. They've never heard that in Japan. They don't say that in Japan. You know, it's work harder, not smarter, right? It's just do what you're told, do what you always do. That's the system here. Is not trying to find a better way to do it. Just do it the way we've always done it. Some of you might remember years ago, I used to be part of a Kyudo group, a Japanese archery group, and every year the dirt embankment behind the targets is called the Azuchi, and every year we had to break down the Azuchi. It's just basically a big mound of dirt, but it's sort of neatly stacked. And because it's had thousands of arrows fired in it throughout the year, it sort of breaks down this embankment and it becomes sort of broken up. So what you have to do is you have to break it right down and then build it up again. There's a big process to it. And usually they get a little bit more soil delivered, special soil, special type of soil, preferred type of soil delivered. And we had to transport it from where it was dropped off the truck to the dojo, where the Kyudo dojo, which was down a long lot of stairs, outside stairs in a park. And when I arrived in the morning, they were shoveling soil into bags, and then carrying the bags down to the Azuchi. And the smaller people were just carrying sort of half full bags, and then the bigger people, the stronger people, were carrying slightly sort of bigger bags, you know. But looking at the pile of dirt and looking at these bags, it was quite evident it was going to take all day just to transport this soil down, right? And on the walk in from the car park, I happened to notice a shed, and in that shed were a couple of wheelbarrows, right? And I looked at these stairs, and beside the stairs was a little concrete path, not very wide, but wide enough for a wheelbarrow. And I looked at what was happening. I said to this sort of senior guy in the group, not one of the teachers, but one of the senior students, and I said to him, "Hey, I saw a couple of wheelbarrows over there. If I grab one of those wheelbarrows, and it's in a park, we had access to this equipment, it'd be quite okay for us to use it." And I said to him, if we grab one of those wheelbarrows over there, you know, I could whiz this stuff down there in no time, you know. And he said, no, we do it this way, right? No, we do it this way. And over the years, I've seen so many examples of similar things to that, where there'll be a way that people are doing something, and it's clearly a waste of time. That there's clearly a much smarter way. That's why the wheelbarrow was invented, right? Right? Thousands of years ago, some guys were moving dirt with some bags, and some smart guy thought, hey, if we put a wheel on this box, we could have a wheelbarrow, right? That's why they developed the wheelbarrow, because it's smarter, isn't it? It's a smarter way to do it. But no, they've always done it this way, carrying these bags down, and so that's the way they're going to do it, right? And again, this video isn't complaining, okay? This isn't complaining, this is just observations, right? As all our videos are, is talking about what we see and what we observe, you know, what we experience in Japan, and this is what we experience. It's also a heads up video for people who might come to Japan in the future to let you know, this is another example. We've talked about this lots and lots of times about, they're not interested in a better way to do things. They're not interested in the foreigner saying, hey, how about we do this? That was early days I did that. Since then I've learned there's no point. If they have a way that they're doing something, if it's just you and one other guy, you might have a chance of doing it a better way. You might. If it's someone that you've got a good relationship with and there's only two of you, you might be able to suggest a better way. But in a group situation like that, where there's a thing that they've done every year and that's just what they've done every year, there's no point in even mentioning it. And this follows through to work, and you see it all the time. I mean, another example, some of you might remember from years ago, there's a common problem that the Japanese government has with foreigners in Japan is they don't get their health insurance, right? So they come to Japan, they start work. Now, if you work for a company in Japan, they'll probably get your health insurance for you, but that's not everybody who comes to Japan and works gets health insurance organised by their employer. So what happens is a lot of people who've lived in Japan for a long time won't have health insurance. They haven't paid health insurance, right? And that's a bit of an issue for the Japanese government. And I noticed when I went to City Hall to get my foreigner registration card years ago, that the foreigner registration card counter and the health insurance counter are side by side. And in some countries, you'd think that the health insurance guys would say, hey, look, the foreigners all have to come to this counter to get their foreigner registration card. When they get their card, we should get these guys who make the card to hand them the health insurance papers so they can fill out the health insurance papers, because a lot of people, they just don't know. It's not that they're trying to avoid paying their health insurance, it's just that, it's very complicated when you first come to Japan. It's something you won't think of. So when you get your foreigner registration card, if they handed you the health insurance papers at the same time, you'd probably take them home and fill them out, wouldn't you? Right? And there's a lot of stuff like that where in a lot of countries, people would notice something like that and say, hey, how about we do this? And their boss would say, hey, that's a good idea. Let's do that, right? And it's a different culture, isn't it? It's a culture where thinking of a good idea and suggesting a good idea is a good thing to do. Right? It shows that you're taking an interest and that you're innovative and you're smart, and all that stuff that in other countries is admired is not admired here. Right? Suggesting a better way to do something to your boss. Some of you might remember years ago on a video, I actually said to my wife, before she was my wife, I said something we watched people doing that was really stupid, right? I can't remember what it was, but it was really stupid. And I said to her, why do they do that? Wouldn't you think they'd do this, and suggested a better way of doing something? And she got a bit pissed off and said, you think you're smarter than everybody, don't you? Right? And it was really interesting because it was like, that's the difference in the thinking, right? Whereas a lot of you guys, if we were together, sitting around together somewhere and we saw one of these scenes carrying the dirt or, the foreigner registration card or a million other examples that I could give you, you go, what the heck? What the heck are they doing it that way for? Isn't that ridiculous? And for us it would be obvious, and if someone suggested a better way, we'd go, yeah, that makes sense. Whereas that's not the way they see it here. They see that one dude says, why are you doing it that way? Why don't you do it this way? Then he thinks he knows more than everybody else. And saying it to your boss is suggesting that's suggesting to your boss that you know more about the job than your boss does. And in most countries now, people recognise that usually the guy that's doing the job, when I say guy, I mean guys girls, ladies, anybody, right? I mean, people. When people are doing a job, the person who's doing the job usually does know more about it than their boss, quite often, right? Because they're actually doing the job. And if they say to their boss, hey boss, how about if I do it this way? Do you think that'd be better? Often the boss will say, yeah, actually that's a good idea, do that. And give you a raise for it, right? There are exceptions to this. There's some companies like Toyota and companies like that that encourage their staff to suggest better ways and things like that. And Toyota is sort of famous for its innovation and its productivity and so on. But it's the exception. It really is. People often talk about Toyota as if that's sort of a standard Japanese thing. It's not. It's the exception to the rule. And the reality probably isn't quite as impressive as what it sounds either. I wouldn't want to be a Toyota employee suggesting something to the boss. Most of that stuff is done anonymously at Toyota. Although I have heard that they give awards to staff if they come up with really good ideas, but I don't know. I wouldn't want to be working in a Japanese company and telling the boss a better way. So you know, this is the stuff. I mean, as a heads up to you, you know, if you come live in Japan, this stuff can drive you crazy because you're forever seeing stuff where you look at it and think, that's ridiculous. That is ridiculous. And you hear stories from people all the time who work for Japanese companies who find themselves doing stupid things and you know, don't want to do it that way because it's ridiculous, but you just have to do it. And when you're in a group like the Kyudo group or groups like that, and sometimes they're doing things in a really inefficient way, and it's like, why are we doing this, you know? But you just got to stay quiet. You can think, why are we doing this on the inside, but on the outside you just have to do it. You know, do what everybody else is doing, you know. But that sort of stuff can drive you crazy sometimes. I should add too, there are examples too where there is the Japanese way of doing it that they've always done, and at first the example that comes to mind straight away is the futon thing. When I first came to Japan, every time there's a really good sunny day, all the neighbours would go and take their futons outside, right? Which is a bit of hard work because futons can be heavy, you know, and take the futons outside and they'd hang them up. And when I first lived here, I used to think, oh, I'm going to faff around with that. You know, I did it occasionally, but usually I didn't. And of course, you know what happened. Japan is so humid that eventually the underside of the futon started to go green, right? You've got to go hang them in the sun regularly to dry them out and to stop them going mouldy, right? The futons. So a lot. There is also stuff like that here where you think that's a waste of time, or that's a ridiculous thing, or why are they doing it that way? But in actual fact, later on you'll find out that, oh no, that's why they do it. It does make sense. So there is some stuff here like that as well. It's often hard to work out which is which. Sometimes they're doing something and you think, does that really make sense? Why are they doing that? As some of you know from previous video, we don't ask why, right? No point in asking why, because if you do that, it's going to say that's just what we do. But sometimes you find out through experience, like the futon experience, that there was a perfectly good reason for it. But, you know, the end result is, when you got companies that are having meetings, you know, they'll have meetings. You'll see them having meetings, you know, the supermarket before it opens in the morning, you know, the supermarket's about to open, and if you're outside waiting for it to open, you'll see the staff all in a circle inside, and the boss is standing there going on and on and on and on, and then they all practice bowing, and they all practice saying, "Irasemasen," and then they all practice whatever it is that the company wants them to say to the customers when they walk in, and they'll all practice it, and they'll often do that every day. So you'll have 20 staff standing there for 10 minutes every morning, listening to the same stuff from the boss that he says every day, and then practicing the greeting thing for 10 minutes. Now, you got 20 staff doing that for 10 minutes. That's 200 minutes, right? And this is where their productivity goes. You know, we've talked about before about the reports. You know, a lot of people, including staff in supermarkets, have to write reports all the time. And you'll see them sitting there. My mate owns a Juku, and I've seen teachers sitting there, their lessons finished, and every day they have to write this report thing about what happened that day in their lesson. And you'll see them sitting there looking at the ceiling trying to think what to write. And again, they don't want a short, succinct description. They want a long one. And we know of someone who worked in a supermarket, and the cash register was up 150 yen at the end of the day, and she had to write a report she had to write a report to the boss about why the cash register was out. And I mean, the reason it was out, obviously, is she shortchanged a customer by accident. Obviously, if the cash register's up by 150 yen. So that's it, isn't it? I must have made a mistake handing it back that change and, you know, shortchanged the customer 150 yen. And she gave it to the boss and he said, oh, yeah, it's got to be longer than that. You got to go back and spend more time, write it longer. Right? And again, you know, we know a guy that worked for Densol that make the car parts, and he had to write a report every month on what his department did that month, you know. And he'd sit there and he'd write these really long reports. I think he spent 2 days out of the month writing a report about what he did during the month, right? Which is ridiculous. About 10% of his time spent writing about what he'd done. And then I said to him, do you think your boss reads those reports? He said, oh, he couldn't, because he gets reports from all these department people. He wouldn't have time to read them all, he said. So they go in a file, nobody reads it. Another one, a modern version of that, is you'll see guys on building sites here beside the road or on building sites building houses, and they'll be out there with their cameras, and they put a board up with the time and date and stuff and take photos, and you'll see guys out there doing it. You can drive past an hour later and he's still doing it. You know, everything has to be paper and pictures and photos and reports, and that's where their time goes, right? They're not getting anything done. They're wasting time with all these meetings and reports and talking and working harder, not smarter, and longer, not smarter, you know? And that's the result. The result is lowest productivity of the G7 countries, and number 35 out of 65 out of 68 or whatever it was. Something like that. You guys can find that. There's a bunch of people watch our videos who are Wikipedia experts. They can find the details like that for you. We just report on what we see and hear. We don't do Wikipedia searches before we make videos, because we've got a couple of people watch our videos who are experts at that. They can do that. So there it is. There it is. Exactly what we've talked about all this time about the faffing and the wasting time and doing it the old style way. So anyway, there was that. That's enough of that. Time to be productive now. Enough of this sitting around talking business. More videos coming soon.